Crooked River, Chapter 5. When the morning birds started up singing, and the light in the room turned to a bluish gray, I wanted to cry with both joy and misery at the same time. After a whole night of lying awake staring into the darkness, I was as tired as death. But me and Laura were still alive. I reckoned that was something to be thankful for, even if it meant another eternal day of cooking for Pa and the boys. I watched as Laura slid her legs out of the bed and hobbled toward the hearth at the other end of the cabin. I don't know why, but I was awful glad to see things begin in the ordinary way they always did. I was glad for the kindling being stubborn to catch fire, as it always was, and for the soft clang of the iron tea kettle being set on the hook. I didn't even mind when Mercy breathed loudly in my ear, "Wake up, Reb." But cooking breakfast was a trial that morning. Maybe it was on account of how tired we were. But I scorched the cornmeal making the corn mush, and Laura missed a pot of boiling water and dropped a handful of good sliced potatoes into the fire. We had to pull them out with a ladle, one by one. They were more than half burnt and covered in ashes. Before we finished that, Pa and the boys came stomping in from the morning milking. Pa was raging at Amos about one of our cows who was in a fair way to die if she didn't have her calf soon. In Pa's eyes, it was all the cow's fault, of course. Dumbest animals on earth, Pa said, taking off his boots and thumping them down on the floor. She can just go on and die. Ain't that right, Amos? Let her lie out there suffering for a week and die. Never been nothing but trouble, that old dumb cow. Pa didn't have no patience for weakness. When Ma died giving birth to Mercy, he hadn't been no different than he was about our cow. He said it was Ma's fault and that she gave up and wanted to die. She would have taken the baby to die with her too, but Mrs. Hawley had kept Mercy alive, nursing her, and a baby of her own. "Why ain't things ready on the table?" Pa said, giving us a scowl. "What the devil you two been doing all this time?" "Everything's done, Pa," Laura answered, and we sent the food clattering onto the table in front of them. Half-burnt cornmeal mush, mashed potatoes, yellow pickles, fried pork, bread, and coffee. "Get that bread down here to me. I'm hungry as a horse," Pa ordered. "And the potatoes. Where's the yeller pickles? This mush looks worse than death." Pa always got his plate first. Next it was Lorenzo, heaping his plate as if he was the only other one to eat. He was chattering on like a two-headed jaybird, talking about the Indian and what was going to happen to him, and asking when the trial was going to be, and nobody was saying a word back. Cousin George sat next to Amos, chewing his food silently. He always acted as if he was one of the lords of creation and never used more than 2 words in talking to us. "Cup's empty," he'd say loudly, or "pork's cold." George had come to live with us after he didn't get any land when his old father died. Just 2 horses and a plow. But you would have thought he owned half a kingdom the way he carried on. In the middle of the meal, Pa waved his table knife at us. "Over here," he said. Me and Laura left the food we were watching on the hearth and came over to the table. I knew we were going to hear about the cornmeal mush. Seemed as if there was always something that wasn't to Pa's liking. "After we get done and you two get your breakfast," Pa told us through a mouthful of half-chewed food, "I want you to go on upstairs and take the rest of this food, whatever scraps is left, to that Indian." "What?" Laura gasped, like a piece of wet wood on a hot fire. I stared at Pa, and my face and arms felt suddenly prickly, as if I was being stuck with 1,000 porcupine quills. Climb into the loft and take food to the murderer? "Ain't no reason for the girls to do that, Pa," Amos said slowly without looking up. "They got plenty of work in front of them. I'll take a dish of food and a slop jar upstairs for the Indian to use, before we head out into the fields." Pa smacked his hand down on the table, making us all jump. "Amos!" he hollered. "You want your sisters to be a burden all your life? 'Cause that's exactly what they is gonna be." He He pointed at us. "How are they going to be fit to live out here in the woods if they can't do nothing for themselves? They'll be just like the Hollies, who couldn't chop the head off a chicken to save their own lives." Amos didn't answer a word, just stared, shoveling food fast into his mouth. Cousin George chewed on a piece of bread and grinned, like he found everything downright humorous, and Lorenzo said loudly, "Well, they ain't livin' with me. I ain't taking care of them when I'm old." That made Pa laugh. He leaned over and smacked Lorenzo on the back. "You're the only one who's got brains," he said. "You can look after me in my old age. How about that?" While Pa was laughing, I let myself breathe again. I figured maybe he had just been trying to give us a fright. I know I ought to get used to such things from Pa. Our Ma always used to say even eels get accustomed to being skinned, but I don't reckon that's true. Next to me, Laura gave a deep sigh and brushed her hands across her apron. "That all you wanted, Pa?" she said softly. When he didn't answer, we just turned back to our work as if we had never stopped ladling out more food, clearing off dishes and boiling water for washing. But Pa didn't forget. As all of them were pulling on their boots to go out to the field, he looked up suddenly and pointed his finger at us. We had just sat down with Mercy to have our little breakfast of green tea and bread. "You remember what I told you about feeding that Indian?" he said sharply. "He ain't had nothing to eat since we brought him here yesterday, so you take a dish of food up to him." The bread I was eating stuck fast in my throat. "Please don't leave us alone with him, Pa," Laura begged, her voice rising. "Me and Reb, we can't fight off Indians, truly we can't. If Indians come, me and Reb, we can't—" "No Indians is gonna come here," Pa spat. "Don't be stupid fools. They know if any harm ever come to the Carvers, we'd kill every last one of them. And that Indian up there," he grinned and gestured towards the chamber loft, "ain't going no place, not with how well he's chained. You just go on up and see for yourselves." Pa opened the cabin door. "So I don't want to hear no more tears or complaining neither. I'm your Pa, and you do what I says." Laura didn't answer. "You listenin'?" Pa hollered. "You hear what I said?" "Yes, Pa," Laura whispered, and then Pa slid out the door like the mean old rattlesnake he was and disappeared. After Pa left, Laura laid her head down on the table and wept so hard that it made me start to tremble with fear. Mercy sat in her chair staring silently at both of us, pale as a little snowdrop. "What on earth are we going to do, Reb?" Laura cried softly. "What on earth are we going to do?" Watching her big shoulders heave up and down with sobs made my heart pound. I was dreadful afraid of being left alone in the world. If I lost Laura, what would happen to me? After Ma died, I didn't think my mind tried to turn Laura into my Ma. It erased and rewrote Laura and Ma as if they were lines drawn on writing slates. But seeing my sister cry as if the world was ending made me realize that even though she was tall and strong for a girl, I could lose her just as quick and heartless as I had lost my Ma. Taking a deep breath, I picked up one of the pewter dishes on the table. "I'll go on upstairs," I said. "I don't much mind. I already seen that Indian once." I tried to keep my voice sounding as if I didn't much mind. I stood up and started to scrape the food from the dish into one of our big wooden bowls. "Sit down," Laura answered, with her voice muffled in her arms. "You will not do any such thing, Reb." I sank back down in my chair again and stared at my hands. I circled my fingers around one of my scrawny wrists and traced the lines on my palm so I wouldn't have to look over at Laura with her head down on the table. Outside, a woodpecker rattled loudly on a tree. It was quiet above us in the loft. I noticed no one would have guessed an Indian was up there. A gray mouse skittered across the plank floor, and I stomped my foot to make him run. "All right," Laura said suddenly. She lifted her head and wiped a sleeve across her face. "You and me, we'll just go on up there and do exactly what Pa said. That Indian kills us, it'll be Pa's price to pay in heaven." I didn't dare to get in her way. As she lumped food into the bowl, her lips were pressed tight together. They made a fierce white line below her nose. "You're going to carry the food," Laura said in a high-strung voice, "and I'm going to walk behind you with a frying pan and a knife. That's what we are going to do." So that's how we went up to the loft. I had a hold of the wooden bowl of leftover food, and Laura followed me with the frying pan. She had once killed a rattlesnake with the same iron pan, flung it right at the snake's head and smashed it flat. The rattlesnake tail had 12 bells on it, if you can believe that, and we still had the tail and the frying pan both. As we crept up the stairs, Laura hissed, "You just be sure to get out of the way." She was holding the pan so close behind me, seemed like I could feel its cold weight pressing on my neck. "If that Indian causes us any trouble, I'm throwing this frying pan at him," she said. "You hear me, Rebecca?" I nodded. From below comes the girl I have seen before, the one with the darting eyes of the bird and the shrieking voice of the jay. Bird eyes. Behind her I see a tall, older one. Tall girl who follows, carries a cooking pot and a long knife in her hands. I close my eyes, asleep. The bird-eyed girl flies toward me like a gust of wind. She leaves a bowl of food at my feet and runs. The older one stands still as a shadow. "Shh," she whispers like the trees. I wait, but tall girl who follows does not move closer, and she does not use the sharp edge of her long knife. When I open my eyes, they are gone.